Okay, so the two commentaries that I rely most on for this one is one by James Dunn, who's a pretty famous scholar if you're a New Testament person, and then also Robert Scott Nash. I didn't remember his name. Okay, so let's read. This is 1 Corinthians 11, 2-6. It's the beginning of this passage. The goal is to kind of get at first just to get an idea, really. The whole point of this is just to get an idea of what did this actually mean in its original context. And so that's the main purpose of this. So can someone read 1 Corinthians 11, 2-6?
Sure. Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head.
Yeah, so this is a passage, and the question of what it means to us, I think, is secondary to what did it mean originally, so that we can figure out what it means for us, right? So first, what's a woman and what's a man in this passage? The word for woman can be translated as wife, and the word for man can be translated as husband. In fact, those two words are the exact same. If you want to say in Greek and also in Hebrew, both are the same. If you say if you want to say like Joey's husband, you would say the man, or sorry, Liv's husband, you would say the man of Liv. And if you said who am I? I'm Joey. The Joey's wife, hi. If you want to say Joey's wife, you'd say the woman of Joey, right? So that the word woman and the word wife in both languages was interchangeable, right? And so the question of, okay, does this mean woman or does this mean wife? Does this mean man or does this mean husband? Those are the same word, and so that means that it's actually I want to hide the Steelers mug from my dad, who might be watching. That is actually an important interpretive question as we see this. So, it's possible that when it says man, it means husband. When it's possible when it says husband, then it means man, and vice versa for women. As we'll see, I think it's primarily talking about married men and married women. That's the main purpose of this as we get into the cultural context. Now, the next question is, what's a head, right? So obviously this passage uses the word head in several different ways, intentionally. It hinges on how you understand this metaphor. So much of the interpretation of this passage comes down to what exactly we mean by head. In some cases, obviously, the head refers to a physical head, right? So if every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered, they're clearly talking about their head being this thing that's on top of the body, right? In some cases, though, it's definitely not physical. So the head of every man is Christ. Clearly, the word head there does not mean the physical head of every man, right? What Paul is doing is kind of a pun, but of course, in order to understand the pun, we need to know what the word head really meant for people in that culture. And of course, so many words have so many different meanings, and the question is which one is really being accessed here in the passage. Praying with the head uncovered refers to your actual head. The head of every man is Christ clearly is not referring to your actual head. Okay, so one possibility for what head can mean is leader. This is probably the one that comes to mind most for us, but I'm not sure it would have been the one that comes to mind for them. So this says something like, the leader of God is Christ, the leader of woman, or the leader of a wife is a husband. A natural metaphor for us, but somewhat less natural for ancient people, because we think of head and we're like, oh, that houses the brain. The brain is the control center of their entire body. Therefore, the brain is the leader of the body. In fact, we even go far beyond that. Like the head is like the most important part of our bodies to us, right? And so that's what we kind of think of. For them, in ancient Egypt, they didn't believe that the head was actually the control center of the body. And metaphorically speaking, even in Greek society, they also talked about the heart as the center of the body. They talked about the mind. And the mind also wasn't they didn't consider the mind to be something that's housed in the brain. They thought the mind was a spiritual thing, right? So you were governed by a spiritual thing. And for that reason, you wouldn't necessarily say, this isn't necessarily quite as natural a metaphor for them as it would be for us. So for some pros, one, it seems natural within a patriarchal society to say that the leader of every wife is the husband, right? Though perhaps caricatured. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was quite as oppressive an arrangement as you might think, but perhaps so it might be a little bit caricatured to say that it's like this terrible like domination, right, going on. But it is possible lexically meaning like having to do with the meaning of words. It is possible that that is what he's referring to. Cons, one, it would suggest that God is the leader / superior of Christ himself. And we believe as Christians who believe in the Council of Nicaea and the later doctrines of the Trinity that God and Christ are the same. But notice, right, it says the head of Christ is God, right, and the head of a wife is her husband. Well, if those are the exact same meaning, that the leader of Christ is God, the leader of a woman is her husband, well, that subordinates Christ to the Father, right? Which, as Christians who believe in the Trinity, we would reject that, right? And so that's a pretty strong argument that it's not necessarily saying the leader or the superior of a woman is a man. Another one is that it's less natural in Greek than in English, as we talked about. You would also, if you expected it to be a matter of, okay, the head is the leader or superior, you would expect it to be in the order of, okay, so the head of every man is, or it would start from, let's say, the least to the greatest. So the head of every woman is a man, the head of every man is Christ, the head of Christ is God, right? A natural progression from least to greatest, or perhaps from greatest to least, the head of, go from God down to woman, right? But that's not what happens. Instead, it starts in the middle. The head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. And so it doesn't have that natural progression that you would expect if what they meant by head was the leader or superior. Any thoughts or questions on that? So that is why I actually reject this idea that what Paul is saying is that the leader or superior of woman is man, right? Or the leader or superior of Christ is God. For that reason, and also because of Paul's other writings where he's very focused on, there's no male or female, there's no Jew or Gentile, all are one in Christ Jesus. This kind of hierarchy, especially in the book of 1 Corinthians, where he's constantly talking about how there's all of these unnatural hierarchies going on in the church, I think that would go against his argument in general. Okay, another possible definition of head is head as source. So head could mean source, like the head of a river. That's where the river comes from. This is also very rare in Greek, and that's another reason why I reject this as well. It suggests that the source of Christ is God. Now, for us Western Christians who believe in, there's a long history of this, by the way, going back to 1054, but we would probably reject this, but Orthodox Christians would be totally fine with this, the idea that the source of God is Christ, because they believe the source of God is Christ, the source of Christ is God, the source of the Holy Spirit is God, and so they very much focus on the Father as the source of all things. And also, just in the same way, the source of woman is man, since woman was taken from man's rib in the book of Genesis. So that's the idea there. And it would also, one pro is that it's sensible Trinitarianism. So it really makes sense with at least one model of how the Trinity works. Another pro that I didn't mention here is that it really fits with a later point that Paul makes about how, on the one hand, women came from a man, like from the rib of Adam. On the other hand, a man has to be born from a woman, in which case both men and women are both dependent on one another, which is a really key point that Paul makes. And so that would really fit with what Paul's saying. There's some sources where the word head is used in this way. Can someone read this one from Herodotus?
springs of the river Taros give the best and fairest waters of all rivers, and to them came leading an army against the Scythians, the best and fairest of all men. Darius, the son of Istapis,
Doesn't matter.
of the Persians, and of all the continent king. Does that mean that he could hold his urine, or what is that?
I don't. Oh, yeah. The king of the continent. Yeah.
These are the words which were there written.
Yeah, so and this is a really key thing to know, is that when scholars are trying to understand a word, what they normally do is they look at how the same word is used in other contexts to get an idea of like the possible meanings. And this is one of those, right? This is an example of how this word is used in other contexts. This is by Herodotus, who's a historian. Can someone read this from the Apocalypse of Moses?
And when he had received the oath from me, he went and poured upon the fruit the poison of his wickedness, which is lust, the root and beginning of every sin. And he bent the branch on the earth, and I took the fruit and I ate.
Yeah, so this is Adam talking. This is an extra biblical, I think maybe post New Testament writing. But notice both of these use the word head for like the start of something, the source of something, kephale, the root and beginning, the kephale of every sin. And notice it's the same word for head that's used for the head of every man is Christ. Now, granted, this second one from the Testament of Moses, or Apocalypse of Moses, is the only time I've ever seen the word head used to mean source. I really looked hard to find it, except as like the head of a river. So again, it's very, very like vanishingly rare for head to be used this way. So one con is that's a very rare usage of the word, and it's practically non-existent except for when it's talking about rivers specifically. So if it were Paul's meaning, right, and it's not supernatural to think that it means head, like that's the meaning of head in this context, I would expect that he would elaborate more. But it is possible, and it is a view that's held by many scholars. Okay, this is the meaning that I think is probably what Paul means. So the word head is used most often for the foremost part of a group. So like the head of an army is the one that you see first, right? It fits both with the metaphorical usage of kephale, which is the word for head, and crucially with lexical derivatives. So a lexical derivative is another word that's based on that word. So for instance, oh gosh, there's got to be, I don't know if there's so many examples. Oh yeah, okay. I meant like, yeah, it probably is cephalopod.
They call it a header, whenever you're doing it.
Yeah.
The letter,
Right.
or it's the beginning
Prefix.
prefix, but I'm gonna say.
For instance, okay, I throw a ball. I also throw a game. So I throw a game as in I intentionally I lost it in any way, right? Intentionally. And so like these, in some sense, almost are different words, even though they come from the same word. And that when you have a word spawn new words based on the original word, that shows something really powerful about the deep metaphorical meaning of the word within someone's head. I'm talking about like in a culture, right? Their head. I recognize that the word head is an extremely ambiguous word, but you see what I mean. So it fits with lexical derivatives. So for instance, kephalion, which is the main point or summary of something, notice that comes from the Greek word kephale, which means head, and it shows that that this idea of the foremost part is so deeply ingrained into them that they create other words based on it, which mean like main point or summary, right? The kephale tu kokliou is the point of a screw. So that's the head, the foremost part of the screw. So this actually makes a lot of sense in the cultural sense, right? So traditional gender roles in the Greco-Roman world included men working outside the home, while the women worked mostly domestically, like inside the home. Go ahead.
So, foremost is a little ambiguous too. You don't mean
The first thing you see,
yeah, the most prominent.
the representative, perhaps. Yeah.
Prominent feature.
So, like for instance, in that sense, like the head of us would be our person in the House of Representatives, let's say, like the person that represents us to the rest of the country. whoever that is. I don't know. Yeah, though there was certainly still a hierarchical relationship, right, in this patriarchal society. Women had some measure of authority inside of the home, right? So the measure of authority for a woman was inside the home. The authority for a man was primarily outside of the home. So the man goes outside of the home and works his job. The woman stays inside the home, raises the children, and has authority there, right? Now, definitely, you could definitely say that hierarchically, the woman in general society was considered the inferior to the superior, right? That's just how it worked culturally. But that's not necessarily like, for instance, we wouldn't necessarily say that our representative in the House of Representatives is our superior, like is better than us, right? That's the whole point, is that he's our representative among our people. So it's not an inevitable meaning that the representative is greater, right? Peer, yeah, a peer representative, perhaps, yeah, good. The man is naturally, therefore, the public face or representative of the family to the public, right? Because he's actually in the public, as opposed to the the woman who's most often working domestically and making sure that things are working at home. In fact, in the word economics comes from the word oikonomia, which is the running of the household. So we did our word for economics from the job that was primarily the job of women in society, oikonomia, the running of the household, right? And because that also included some more like mercantile, like having to do with business things, right? So the man is therefore naturally the public face or representative of the family, and this is the key, and I think this is the point that Paul is making, is that to bring the public face of the family shame is to bring shame on the family as a whole. Right? If you are bringing shame on your representative, you're also bringing shame on you yourself, right? You can see that in, like if you're a parent, right, and you have kids, right? You recognize this, that when your kids are acting rambunctious, that reflects poorly on you yourself, right? And so that's maybe something like what Paul is saying. Okay, so here this is my kind of paraphrase where I've color-coded the word head to show what I think the word head really means when it's used in each time. So when it's purple, it means representative. So the representative of every man is Christ. The representative of a wife is her husband. The representative of Christ is God. And on the other hand, in green, I said physical head, right? The actual thing on top of your body, right? So every man who prays or prophesies with his head uncovered, physical head, dishonors his head, representative. Every wife who prays or prophesies with her head, physical head, uncovered, dishonors her head, her representative, Christ, or the man, right? So this is the key pun that Paul is making, right? It's not that she's dishonoring her physical head; she's dishonoring her husband. The man who prays with his head covered is dishonoring his representative, which is Christ, right? And that's the point that Paul is making primarily. Any questions so far?
I guess my question is, I always look at the filter of the time and space that it was written in. And
Right.
This is an interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
God didn't say you have to cover your head. He said angels come. Have they ever seen an angel?
No.
So I guess
Yeah.
I have issues.
Yes, and I think you will understand why Paul is saying this when you understand the cultural background of why he's saying it. Because I don't think Paul is saying this as a prescription for all people of all times to do. He's saying this specifically for this cultural moment when covering your head means something very specific, right? So like, for instance, if I wore a hat, doesn't mean a whole lot. There's some things that would mean, like if I wore a hat at the pulpit, some people would say that would be disrespectful. Maybe if I'm wearing a hat, it's to cover that I'm bald or something like that, right? That's another reason that. But like those are all things that are not like intrinsic to the very act of wearing a hat itself. They're determined by your culture, and I think the same thing was going on here.
So, but I'm still confused because in the Jewish faith today,
Mhm.
a man, and
Right.
it's also my understanding that when I've seen
Yep.
travel things where men are gathering in worship in Islam, in
Yep.
they all have a head cover.
Yes.
So I don't understand
Yes.
Was that because the people in Corinth
Yes.
were mostly Gentiles, and so they were like, I don't know. So this
Yes.
I'm finding this very confusing.
And I think, no, but that is actually a really key point because it shows that Paul is talking to one specific culture because his own culture veils both men and women. Like a married woman in Jewish Oriental culture was supposed to wear a veil, and a man was also supposed to cover his head, right? And so that shows that if he's talking about how it's dishonorable for a man to cover his head, well, clearly he's not talking from his own culture. He's talking about this specific Corinth culture. So this is a very contextualized message. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Just to make things more complicated, I was at a basilica yesterday and was wearing a hat. They told me to take it off.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, because we associate wearing a hat with something disrespectful, right? But like, you could imagine so many cultures where you look at someone wearing a hat and they would say, "Oh, they're wearing a hat," or like even "you ought to wear a hat," right? And so that's not intrinsic to the act of wearing a hat itself, you know. And that's not the point that Paul's making either.
And actually, in Orthodox Judaism, the men will wear a regular black hat outside the church, but as soon as they enter the synagogue, they have to wear the yarmulke.
Yeah.
So it's a specific prayer covering.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly when the yarmulke was ubiquitous in the Jewish religion, but yeah. Okay, go ahead. Okay.
I'm just curious, so, I mean, we talk about Islam and we talk about Orthodox Jews or Jews, but they're still, they don't, this is from the Old Testament, right? They don't accept Christ in the New Testament.
This is in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians, yeah.
Yeah, but my question becomes, there's still people trying to enforce some of the stuff in today's world.
Right.
Cultural environment, and not so much from the male side of the house, but from the female side of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually being used as a controlling mechanism,
Yeah.
right? So this is where I have a lot of issues with it.
Yeah.
They hark back to the stuff that enforces that position, but they don't look at the part that says you should love your wife like
Yeah.
Christ loved the church.
Right, in Ephesians, absolutely.
You know, so
Yeah, and again, I think I'd be interested to see what you say once we get to like what this act of covering the head really meant in their culture, because I think maybe I'd be interested in seeing. Yeah,
We'll be quiet.
go ahead.
We did have a guide in Istanbul explain to us about women covering their head because they make them cover their head before they go into the mosque. And he said, it's not because there's anything wrong with your hair, it's because they think men will just go crazy.
Yeah.
If they see your hair, so you have to,
so why is that a woman's responsibility?
I didn't make it.
All right. Okay. So head covering practices. Both men and women in Roman society would sometimes cover their heads in worship. So this is a thing that happened. It wasn't like this unheard of idea, right? In each case, it meant something very different. What Paul is saying is that what Paul is saying about head coverings is actually very sensible when you understand the cultural background, what it really meant to cover your head. So men wearing head coverings. So a priest would pull the toga up over his head when leading prayer and worship. So it suggests that he is taking leadership over the ceremony.
When you say, you're talking about Jewish priests?
No, this is in pagan ritual, right? So examples, right? This is Nero and Augustus Caesar and Nero, who were both. The emperor was long story. Julius Caesar bought the position of Pontifex Maximus, which you might know is the exact same title that the Pope has. He bought that position and in order to consolidate power, and ultimately that meant that the emperor of Rome, over the long term, turned into the Pontifex Maximus, the leader of the Roman religion. And so here, Nero and Augustus are pictured as Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the Roman religion, both with a hood over their head, the hood of their toga over their head. So what the point is that Paul's making is, one, it creates three problems that dishonors the head of the man. The head of the man is Christ, right? So one, it adds a pagan religious practice to the church, which is bad. You're mixing together this other religion that you've left with the religion of Jesus Christ. Second, it suggests that he is the leader of the ceremony and not Christ, right? The man putting his head, a toga over his head, shows that he is the high priest, when in fact our high priest is Jesus Christ himself, right? So it is usurping the authority of Jesus Christ. Now, of course, it's possible that a man might do that because he's really used to being the leader in the religious practices. This is just what he does. He might not even be thinking about it like that. But Paul is saying, no, you are asserting your own superiority over everyone around you, and in fact over Christ. And that dishonors your head being Christ, right? That's the point. 3, it probably reinforced socioeconomic differences. Saying, and all throughout the book of 1 Corinthians, he's talking about how there's certain Corinthian men who are acting superior to everyone else because they're more wealthy, they're higher social status outside of the church, they're the smart guys, they're the intellectuals, they're so wise, and so they start usurping authority inside the church, and it's leading to all kinds of problems. And Paul's saying, no, you need to stop that. And so he says, you cannot be putting your toga up over your head because that's showing that you are better than the people around you. So men doing this in the church dishonored Christ, so Paul instructed that it should not be done. Any thoughts on that? Made sense. Yeah, good. Okay, women wearing head coverings. So married women wore head coverings in public. This is just culturally what people did, married women. Virgins, widows, and prostitutes, on the other hand, did not. Not wearing one would suggest one of 4 things, which dishonors their head, their representative, their husband. 1, ecstatic prophecy. We'll talk about that later. It's coming up. Second, we'll get back to it. Second, rejection of her husband. It is to say, okay, it would be almost like, and I'm guilty of this, I'm very sorry, but sometimes I take my ring off, right, because it's uncomfortable sometimes. And it would be kind of like going to church and taking your ring off, right, as if to say, like, I'm no longer married to this person, I reject this person. Rejection of her husband is the second thing. The third one would be prostitution, right? And finally, in the fourth one, this is a long story, but there was this, in the 1st century AD and 1st century BC, there was like a kind of proto-feminist movement that happened in the Roman society, where basically men had the right to be basically as sexually promiscuous as you want, like to have sex with whoever you want, men, women, whoever you want, right? That was kind of, I mean, that probably is a caricature, but definitely they had more sexual rights than women, right? Women, you have to be a virgin, and you have to, when you're married, and you have to marry and only have sex with your husband. So there was much more strict for women than for men. During this time, some women really wanted to assert the same rights to promiscuity that men had. And so they would uncover their heads even when they're married to show I can have sex with whoever I want. Of course, Paul in 1 Corinthians has an entirely different answer to that, which is, okay, yes, there's this double standard between men and women in 1st century Roman society. The answer isn't that both of you can be as promiscuous as you want, is that both of you need to be held to the same standards that women are held to, which is that you have one husband if you're a woman, one wife if you're a man, and that you only have sex with them. Any thoughts or questions on that?
They still haven't gotten the message.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so those 4 things would be considered to dishonor their representative, their head, which is their husband. So what about shaving the head? So Paul says, okay, if you're not gonna cover your head, you may as well shave it. What the heck? Where does that come from? That doesn't make any sense to us, right? But to them, it would have made sense, right? Shaving the head was especially shameful since it was a punishment for adultery, a mark of slavery, or a mark of prostitution. So can somebody read that example?
A shaved head was especially shameful.
Oh, the quotation.
She, Demeter,
Whatever.
gave the people of Cyprus the following 3 laws. A woman guilty of adultery shall have her hair cut off and be a harlot. Her daughter become an adulteress, had her hair cut off according to the law, and practice harlotry.
Yeah, so he's saying basically if you're going to uncover your head and suggest these 4 things about yourself, you may as well go the whole way and shave your head because that shows just the same 4 things, right? You may as well do all of these 4 things, right? Go ahead, okay.
Just a question, so I know Orthodox Jewish women shave their heads
Yeah,
and then they wear a wig.
yep.
I don't get it.
Okay, again, right? Paul is this is a really key thing that Paul is intentionally not reproducing, and this is all throughout Paul's entire project. His entire project is saying, okay, you can be a Christian without being a Jew, right? You don't need to reproduce the cultural habits of Jews in this new world. You can be Gentiles, you can be Corinthians, you can be Greeks, you can be Romans, and also be Christians. And so in here, right, Paul is intentionally, right, not doing that. He's not saying you need to adopt these Jewish practices. You can, and so again, it shows, I think, pretty clearly that this is a contextual message about how to live out the gospel in the city of Corinth. And it is not necessarily a one-to-one, we should do the exact same things here in the 21st century in America, right? Yeah.
We should follow the spirit.
Yes.
Message.
The spirit of the message that we should respect the people around us. We should show love to them by not showing our rejection for them. Yeah.
This would be a digression,
Go ahead. We love digressions.
but for some Christians, that would be saying you don't believe the Bible's inerrant and whatever.
Yeah. I think that they're wrong. No, I think that they're wrong because, and I know Christians like that, and I am really good friends with them because often if they recognize that Paul wasn't intending a once-for-all like thing either, then they recognize, oh, that means that this passage isn't intended for me either, right? Again, all Scripture is for us, but it's not necessarily addressed to us, right? Like it's addressed to a very. We're literally reading Paul's mail. Like obviously, when you read somebody's mail, it's not gonna be something that we can easily understand, right? We have to kind of recreate the situation, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a goddess, either a Greek goddess or a woman. It's kind of hard to tell when you just see a statue, but it's a married woman with her head, with a toga over her head, which shows that she's married. Okay, can somebody read this whole passage again? That way we can get like a read with all the context involved.
You want us to substitute representative?
Just read it with head.
I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of the wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors your head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head.
Yeah, any thoughts?
Curious.
Yeah.
So does that mean a woman cannot talk directly to God? Is God not the head of a woman as well?
Yeah, see, I think that's the thing, is it's the representative, right, before, right, because, yeah, I think that's the point, is that a woman is represented publicly by a man in this culture where the woman works within the house and the man works outside of the house, right, just naturally, right?
That's within that contextual frame of time.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
So really, this doesn't apply to those of us who aren't married.
That's a great question.
And because it doesn't apply to those of us who aren't married, do we get to talk directly to God? Or do we have to find
Oh, you absolutely, like, if you are a married woman, you absolutely can talk directly to God, right? I think, and again, like, Paul would have been 100% fine with a woman talking directly to God in this culture too, right? He's talking about, okay, we're dealing, and this is kind of part of the problem too, is in the early church, right, they worshiped in a home. And that's weird because it means that there's this blurring of distinction between a public and private space, right? We worship, which is something we normally do in public, but we're doing it in a house, which is something that's normally done in private. And when you have like this hard distinction, okay, man is the public face, the woman is the private face, right, in this culture, then it's ripe for all kinds of conflict, right? Because now we're in a home which is both public and private at the same time. And they had to worship in homes because where else would they worship, right? Because their religion was illegal. And so I think that's all the more reason, right? We absolutely can follow this passage, but we follow it and we really uphold its spirit when we show love for one another and we don't lord our authority over one another and that kind of thing. Like that's the point of this passage, to show love for one another and respect and honor to each other.
Well, I'm gonna age myself here, but, okay, up until the early 70s, a woman in this country could not get a loan, a credit card,
Yeah.
buy a house without a male signature.
Right.
And we seem to be approaching that attitude again.
Yep.
So my question becomes, why is it the women are made to bear the brunt of the disgruntledness of a society by trying to lock her up, put her away, cover her up, when she's not the problem?
And again, I would say that this passage, if you really are honoring this passage, you would show love and concern and honor for men and women, right? And that's really the point. And we'll see, like in the next passage, right? The whole point is that men and women are dependent on one another, right? We need one another, and that's a key, arguably like the main point of the passage for Paul. So my paraphrase: you should know that the one who represents a husband is Jesus. The one who represents publicly a wife is her husband. The one who represents Jesus is God. You should show respect to anyone who represents you. After all, if your representative is shamed, you're shamed also. So for that reason, a man should not cover his head in worship. If he does, he disrespects Christ by claiming to be the leader of the church. A wife, on the other hand, should not cover her head. Should cover her head. Covering her head shows that she is married. Not covering her head could give the wrong idea and cause shame to her husband. You all depend on one another. After all, women were created from men in Genesis, and men are born from women. You should show one another love and respect. That's kind of the main purpose, right? That this is a church that does not showing love and respect to one another. You should do that.
So basically, this is covering your head because you're married and not covering your head for prayer.
Yes, I think I'm agreeing with you. Yes, there's so many words head here that I have a hard time keeping up. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because the way you're saying it is that if you're a married woman and your head's not covered, then people think they can do whatever.
Yep.
But it doesn't say you have to do it for prayer.
Specifically, yeah. In a minute, that'll be the more. You are referring to the next thing in the passage.
Okay.
Yes. So we'll get to that. Anybody else? Okay. This is the part that the actual question was about. But I feel like we needed to get the whole thing out of the way before we got here. So can somebody read this?
What was the question again?
Why should we marry him? Because of the angels.
You don't even know.
Yeah, so this very verse, now we're actually at the verse itself.
I went here for that.
We're the angels. Okay.
Here we are. Someone read.
That is why a woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head, because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, women is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman, and all things are from God.
So we are dependent on one another and ultimately dependent on God, right? Okay, so what in the world is Paul saying right here? So there's several possible explanations. One is against prophetic ecstasy. So I mentioned this earlier that we were going to get back to this. It's static prophecy. We're now talking about it. So ecstasy, if you know, like, oh, that cake was pure ecstasy. What you mean is that you are, in Greek, ecstasy means to stand outside of oneself. So it's to be like, oh, that's so beautiful. I had like an out-of-body experience of this cake, right? Ecstasy. So it's something like out of control. So a prophecy, in the Greek world, they considered a prophecy to be genuine if there wasn't human influence on it, right? The more human influence on a prophecy, the worse it is. In fact, that's something that we kind of have in our heads too, right? Like, we don't want it to be a natural thing. We want to be sure it came from the gods. You know it's genuine if a person is acting ecstatic, or out of their own control. The gods or the spirits have taken over their body, and now they are prophesying, right? They couldn't even do it on their own. So, okay, I'm just going to summarize this. This is a lot of text. So this is, the Oracle at Delphi was like the most famous of all the prophetic places in the ancient world. Like, it was super, everyone loved it, the Oracle at Delphi. So basically, the way that they discovered it was that there was this big chasm. Some people thought that there was like certain like gases that were emitted from it that led people to get like kind of high on them, and then they'd start like prophesying, and they thought that they were prophesying, but it really was gas. That's possible. It's possible that they were actually like spirits, like actual, supernatural spirits that were there. Who knows, right? So yeah, they came to this forbidden sanctuary, and there were goats that wanted to feed there, but it hadn't been settled, and any goat that came to the chasm peered into it and would leap into it in extraordinary fashion, and I'm just going to read it. It would utter a sound quite different from what it was formerly wont to emit. The herdsmen in charge of the goats marveled at this strange phenomenon, and having approached it had the same experience as the goats. For the goats began to act like possessed, and the goat herd began to foretell future events. So they just stumbled on this area where all of a sudden they started prophesying. And as this report was, long story short, they report this to everyone, and this becomes kind of like an orderly thing in their religion, right? We're gonna go to this place, and that's how we're gonna, learn to prophesy, right? Eventually, it came to be that only women did it there. And then it was because they wanted only virgins to be there because they were like not under the control of husbands or something like that. Unfortunately, there were rapes that occurred of these virgins at the Oracle of Delphi. That is often a part of pagan religion at this time, that you would have sex with a priestess, and that means that you have like some kind of special communion with the gods. So they eventually decided, okay, we're gonna not have virgins do it. We're gonna have married widows who are older do it, and they would prophesy with their head uncovered because that they were kind of out of control and were dressed as virgins, right? A widow who had been married at one point. Yeah, like an older woman. Wait, no, I think it was. Okay, here we are. Yeah. Yeah, it says a virgin should no longer prophesy, but that an elderly woman of 50 should declare the oracles, and she should be dressed in the costume of a virgin, as a reminder of the priestesses of older times. Yeah. So I was on the wrong slide. So actually, it was a married woman, not a widow. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we move on? But notice, right? They said, right, what the archetypal, like what it really looks like to be a priestess, a prophetess, is to have to be dressed as a virgin with your head uncovered, right? So you're under this kind of pagan religion, right? It's static prophecy. This is Socrates on the benefits of insanity. This is very fun. Can somebody read the first paragraph there?
I must say the saying is not true, which teaches that when a lover is at hand, the non-lover should be more favored, because the lover is insane and the other sane. For if it were a simple fact that insanity is an evil, the saying would be true, but in reality, the greatest of blessings come to us through madness, when the assent is a gift of God.
So this is Socrates being a bit of a romantic, right? So he's saying, like, okay, on the one hand, you could say,
Love, you're insane.
yeah, exactly. So on the one hand, like, if you,
That's what you call crazy in
crazy in love. It's absolutely, everybody has felt that way from the beginning, right? Even going back to Socrates, right? So on the one hand, right, we have, you could say, okay, you shouldn't prefer the lover who you're not in love, you're in love with, because then you won't be insane. But Socrates is saying, actually, there's many benefits to being insane, right? Including being in love. Being in love is a wonderful thing, right? You see what I mean? I love you, Liv, so much. Can somebody read the next passage, paragraph?
For the prophetess at Delphi and priestesses at Dodona, when they have been mad, have conferred many splendid benefits upon Greece, both in private and public affairs, but few or none when they have been in their right mind. And if we should speak of the Sibyl,
The Sibylline oracles were another group of prophecies.
and all of the others who by prophetic inspiration have foretold many things to many persons, and thereby made them fortunate afterwards. Anyone could see that we should speak a long time, and it is worthwhile to adduce instead of deduce.
Whatever.
All right. Also the fact that those men of old who invented names thought that madness was neither shameful nor disgraceful. Otherwise, they would have connected the very word, they would not have connected the word mania with the noblest of arts, which foretells the future by calling it the manic art.
Yeah. So Socrates is saying, okay, actually, insanity isn't the worst thing in the world. And my best possible example of why insanity is not so bad is because through insanity, the gods speak to us, right? And that's what it means to be a prophet, is to go completely, insane, bonkers, to go bonkers, and the gods will take over your body and your mouth, and you'll start speaking their oracles, right? So that's how these pagan people thought about prophecy. And especially that prophecy was was often the job of women, right? That women would prophesy by behaving, by wearing the costume of a virgin with her head uncovered and acting as if they're completely insane, right? Yeah. So Paul's response to prophetic ecstasy, and this isn't the only place in 1 Corinthians that he talks about this, he talks about this elsewhere. He says, Paul rejects that ecstasy, the idea of being out of control, makes prophecy more reliable. So and what he's saying is that there are other spirits that are not safe that can take over when you are not in your right mind, right? That prophecy should be done in your right mind. You shouldn't be insane when you're doing it. You should recognize and test the spirits between, okay, this could be a demonic spirit. This could be the Spirit of God, right? Yeah, good. So in other words, and also that ecstasy harms the order of worship. So it's not intelligible when everyone is all around, yelling and screaming the different prophecies that they think they're having, right? They should be in the right mind. They should be controlled so that everyone can understand and interpret what's going on.
1 Corinthians 14.
Yeah, that's 2 chapters hence, right? Coming up, exactly.
In determining when somebody is not in their right mind, is it a temporary or a permanent situation?
Most of the time, it's a temporary insanity, right? And it's all the more like if someone, because they thought that helped the reliability of a prophecy, right? It's all the more reliable in their culture if someone is normally totally normal and then all of a sudden goes bat-crap crazy and starts prophesying.
What happens when they go into these temples that have these vapors coming out of them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a theory for how the Oracle of Delphi works, but who knows? Yeah.
It just seems convenient.
Sure.
I could work that system really well.
Oh, you could. I'm sure they did, yeah.
Hey, they tried that in the '60s, just think about it, all the
Yeah, LSD and, yeah, fair enough.
This is gonna open your mind, this is gonna
Right.
help you perceive things that you can't see in your quote-unquote
Well, they're
right
trying it
mind.
now with the gaslighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Can someone read 1 Corinthians 10:16-22? This is the one on the left.
The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? The the bread that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one bread. We who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? What do I imply that food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, I imply that what pagan sacrifice they offer to demons, but not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he?
So you can see that part of Paul's thing is that he's worried that in giving yourself up to all of these into ecstatic prophecy, that you could hand yourself over to demons, that they could take over your body and not just, Jesus, right? Can somebody read, this is 1 Corinthians 14, 26 to 33. It's the one on the right.
What then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. If any speak in a tongue, let there be only two or at most three, and each in turn, and let someone interpret. But if there is no one to interpret, let each of them keep silent in church and speak to himself and to God. Let two or three prophets speak, and let the others weigh what is said. If a revelation is made to another sitting there, let the first be silent. For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and all be encouraged, and the spirits of prophets are subject to prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace.
Okay, so reading, right, you can, where was I? For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and be encouraged. For and the spirits of prophets are subject to prophets. Would a person in normal pagan Greek religion agree with that statement? No. They would say what it really means to be a prophet is to be out of your mind, right? To go completely insane and to therefore be taken over by the gods. So what Paul is saying is, no, this is not how prophecy is done in the Christian church. Because you're not doing it in order to draw attention to yourself. It's not about who had the best prophecy or anything like that. There's no spirit of competitiveness here. It's just we're doing this for the building up of the church in general, right? Good. So the against prophetic ecstasy explanation. So women should keep their head. This is a second explanation. Oh, this is the explanation, sorry. Women should keep their head covered to assert authority over their own heads. That's the word that he says, right? They should have a symbol of authority over their heads to show that they are in control as they prophesy and pray. And notice, right, he's not saying women should not be prophesying. He's saying that women should be in control. They should have a symbol of authority over their heads as they are prophesying. Otherwise, they might fall under the influence of the angels who bring ecstasy. So pros, it does a great job of explaining why God uses the word authority. It's a plausible but not certain explanation of angels, right? Certainly there's a tradition of fallen angels exercising influence over people. But would Paul have instead used the word demons? It's possible that instead, if that were what he meant, that he would use the word demons. It relates well to the discussion in chapter 14. The problem is it has a hard time relating to some other the rest of the passage, right? This is a much simpler explanation, which is that angels just means messengers, right? The word angel can also just mean messenger, and so it posits that there might have been a background where there were messengers coming to Paul scandalized by women praying with head uncovered, and he said, because of these messengers, you should show up and tell them you should do X, Y, and Z, right? See what I mean? So some pros, it's a nice, clean explanation. There's no need to look for a broad tradition of spiritual explanation. Cons, it shows that there might be this whole background that we don't know about, which is fair because we're reading other people's mail. But that's not debilitating. Another con is that Paul's making an argument going back to the beginning of creation, and it may not be natural to all of a sudden start talking about one very specific situation, but that's fine. Yep, that's the whole thing there. So that's my answer. The answer is, my answer is the prophetic ecstasy thing, but anyway. Okay, any thoughts or questions before we close?
So I
Yes.
And a man never wore a hat
Mhm.
into the church.
Right.
He might put it on the minute it came out.
Right.
And that was definitely true with my grandmother.
Right.
And then about, I don't remember, my mother was not a big hat wearer.
Right.
So that must have happened somewhere about 1960.
Yeah.
Suddenly, women stopped wearing hats.
Hmm.
And it's hard to tell whether that was a fashion thing. It's still a fashion thing in England, but not here.
Hmm.
Men did
But-
too, men stopped wearing hats around then.
Yeah, because Greg's father wore a hat all the time.
Yeah.
But he was from New York, and it's more of a, I think it was a cultural thing.
Right.
My dad is not a big hat wearer, so.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how much of that just became a fashion item.
Yeah.
Therefore, because it was no longer a fashion thing in American society
Mhm.
as a whole, it fell away from the church as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, even when I grew up, women wore a head covering to Love Feast, for sure. They would wear like little head coverings. And so, I mean, yeah.
One of the reasons Brits still wear hats is a conscious decision to maintain the millinery industry.
Yeah.
I'm serious. That is
Yeah.
basically why you see all the women of the royal family wear them.
Hmm.
They're setting a standard to maintain hat makers.
Right.
Do a good job.
Yeah, and I'd say like there's definitely weaknesses to my interpretation too. Like there's weaknesses to any of these, especially because we're reading other people's mail from 2,000 years ago. But I think, and another of the problems is just that there is like, if you want to look at the cultural backgrounds of a text, well, there's like an infinite amount of data that you can bring in for any interpretation, and that's one of the really difficult things about this passage in particular. And so I am open to any kind of interpretation here, including ones that say that I'm wrong or evil or whatever. But go ahead, Barbara.
I understand how they get the angels, but that's
Yeah.
kind of, but I still, and like you said, there's still many people who wear a prayer covering
Right.
during love feast.
Yeah.
And the Amish still cover
Right.
their heads. So where does that come from?
I think it comes from this passage. Yeah.
Well, but it doesn't say, I mean,
Yeah.
again, it only talks about married women.
Yeah, it uses the word woman, which also can mean wife, and that's one of the big difficulties with this text too. Yeah.
And so, as an unmarried woman, in some brethren cultures in the Amish, I would still have to wear
Head covering. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't see how that comes from.
Well, in the earlier days, brethren, Rhonda, you could probably speak to this too. Even girls would wear the prayer bonnet.
Yeah, but it was called a prayer covering.
Yeah.
I think it was.
For prayer
what I
specifically.
told what I remember my grandmother talking about it was, they did it at Love Feast. Well, she wore it other times,
Mm-hmm.
but,
She wore it underneath her bonnet, right?
she wore it all the time. But, yeah, it was supposed to be when you're in more of an attitude of prayer.
Yeah.
I think that's the key that what I hear with this is attitude. You remember what Jesus was going to say of, the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
You just have to look back in the context of that. Ultimately, it comes down to attitude of love and respect. And as long as within that culture you're demonstrating and trying to, demonstrate that you're being as respectful as you can, as long as people are all in the same thing, that you're trying to do the best you can to make sure
Yeah.
that you're showing the love and respect that you all wish, as long as everyone's on that.
Right.
So I think that's just, it's in that context, taking other people's feelings into consideration.
Right.
And I think that's always what is seen there.
Yeah, and also like avoiding a spirit of competitiveness, which was all throughout the Corinthian church of like, okay, look at me, I'm the super awesome prophet, or I'm the super awesome, X, Y, and Z. Instead, being always focused not on yourself but on the building up of the church as a whole, and out of love. Yeah.
And I saw that happen in this church,
Yeah.
where the older ladies would wear the prayer coverings.
Right.
To Love Feast, and they would hand them out
Yeah.
to the women who came who didn't own one or didn't, and sometimes women would say, well, I don't really wanna wear that.
Right.
And they would, sometimes the older ones, you could tell that they were a little displeased with that
Mhm.
answer. And then, it became more, I think, we don't want to make the younger ones feel like they have to do what we got.
Yeah.
They're used to doing, so rather than make them feel uncomfortable, we just kind of, well, they first started out not handing them out.
Yeah.
anymore,
Mhm.
Unless somebody asked, and then people started eating that had worn them stopped wearing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Paul in 1 Corinthians is constantly talking about is like not violating your conscience. You know, like, okay, this is like, he deals with a couple of things that's like, you know, the Bible's not super clear about this. I don't really have a message from God about this. But what I don't want you to do is do something that violates your conscience, because your conscience is a really powerful tool for following God's will. And if you start violating it, even to help, you know, even to knuckle under and do what everyone around you does, right, you might find that you don't have it when you really need it, you know?
Even eating food offered to idols.
Right, yeah.
You know,
That's a huge part of Paul's, that's 1 Corinthians again, yeah. Awesome. Any other thoughts? I thought this was fun. Yeah, okay, cool.